The silence in space was always the same, cold, endless, and somehow heavy. Commander Zarevek stood alone in the observation deck of the massive warship called Hegemony, watching distant stars twinkle like tiny diamonds against the black canvas of space. Her reflection stared back at her from the thick glass. A woman in a perfectly pressed silver uniform, shoulders straight, face calm and controlled. This was the face that thousands of soldiers knew, the face that enemies feared, the face that never showed doubt. But tonight, something felt different. Zara had been standing here for over an hour, which was unusual for her. Usually, she moved with purpose, always busy, always planning the next move. Her days were filled with meetings, tactical discussions, and decisions that could change the fate of entire planets. She was the Iron Commander, after all. That's what they called her, a woman who never bent, never broke, never showed weakness. The war had been going on for so long that most people couldn't remember what peace felt like. 3 major conflicts across different star systems, countless smaller battles, and always the pressure to keep pushing forward. For 15 years, Zara had led the Centauri coalition through it all. She had won battles that seemed impossible to win. She had made decisions that saved millions of lives. She had also made decisions that cost lives, though she tried not to think about those as much. The upcoming peace talks with the Terran Federation were supposed to be good news. After decades of fighting, there was finally a chance to end the bloodshed. But Zara knew it wouldn't be that simple. The other leaders in the coalition wanted to keep fighting. They saw the peace talks as a sign of weakness, a chance for their enemies to regroup and attack again later. She touched the cold glass with her fingertips, feeling the slight vibration of the ship's engines humming through the metal. How many ships like this one had she commanded? How many young soldiers had looked up to her with trust in their eyes, believing she would bring them home safely? Too many to count. And not all of them had made it home. The weight of every decision she had ever made seemed to press down on her shoulders tonight. Every battle plan, every strategic choice, every moment when she had to choose between saving one group of people or another. The responsibilities of command had slowly consumed everything else in her life. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed freely, or cried, or even felt truly angry. Those emotions had been buried under layers of duty and discipline. When she was younger, fresh out of the academy, she had dreams that went beyond war. She wanted to explore new worlds, to help build colonies where families could live in peace, to be part of something that created rather than destroyed. Those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else now, a different person who had worn this same uniform, but had somehow been softer, more hopeful. The door behind her whispered open, and she heard familiar footsteps. Lieutenant Kess approached carefully, carrying a small tablet with the latest intelligence reports. Kess was young, maybe 25, with the same eager energy that Zara remembered having once upon a time. The lieutenant had been working as her aide for 2 years now, long enough to understand when the commander needed space and when she needed information. "Commander, the evening reports are ready," Kess said quietly, clearly sensing that this wasn't a moment for formal military protocol. Zara turned slowly, and for just a split second, her carefully controlled expression slipped. The exhaustion she had been hiding showed in her eyes, the uncertainty, the deep tiredness that came from carrying the weight of an entire civilization on her shoulders. It was only for a moment, but Kess saw it. The young lieutenant paused, tablet forgotten in her hands. She had never seen the Iron Commander look human, vulnerable, for 2 years. Kess had watched Zara move through the ship like a force of nature, always confident, always in control. But right now, standing in the dim light of the observation deck, she looked like a person who had been fighting for too long and was starting to wonder if she remembered how to do anything else. "Is everything all right, Commander?" Kess asked, her voice softer than usual. Zara straightened immediately, pulling her mask back into place. The moment of vulnerability disappeared as if it had never happened. Of course. What did the reports say? But something had changed. Kess had seen behind the uniform, even if only for a heartbeat, and somehow that brief glimpse made Zara seem Not weaker, but more real, more worthy of the loyalty that so many people had given her over the years. As Kess began reading the intelligence summary, Sarah listened with half her attention. The other half was still thinking about the woman she used to be, the dreams she used to have, and the life she had given up to become the person everyone needed her to be. She wondered if it had been worth it. She wondered if she would ever find out who she might have been if she hadn't chosen this path. The stars outside continued their ancient dance, unchanged by human struggles and ambitions. They had been there long before the war began, and they would be there long after it ended. But for the first time in years, Sarah found herself hoping that she might live to see that peace, and that when it came, there might still be enough of the woman beneath the uniform to enjoy it. The reports finished, Kess prepared to leave, but hesitated at the door. "Commander, if you need anything." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Sarah replied, her voice carrying just a hint of warmth. "That will be all." As the door closed and silence returned to the observation deck, Sarah realized that something important had just happened. Someone had seen her moment of doubt, her humanity, and hadn't looked away in disgust or disappointment. Instead, there had been something that looked almost like understanding in the young officer's eyes. Maybe, just maybe, being human wasn't the weakness she had always thought it was. The War Council chamber felt colder than usual this morning. Sarah walked in precisely at 0800 hours, her boots clicking against the polished metal floor in a rhythm that had become second nature. Over the years, the massive oval table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by chairs that would soon be filled with the coalition's most senior military leaders. These were the people who had fought alongside her through countless battles, who had trusted her judgment when the odds seemed impossible. But today felt different. Today, they would discuss peace. And Sarah knew that not everyone in this room wanted to hear that word. General Thorne was already seated, his withered face bearing the scars of the Outer Rim campaigns. He had been fighting this war longer than almost anyone, and it showed in the way he carried himself, like a man who had forgotten what it felt like to not be at war. Admiral Kor sat across from him, her fingers drumming impatiently on the table. She commanded the coalition's largest fleet and had never lost a major engagement. To her, victory was the only acceptable outcome. Others filed in slowly. Commander Voss from the Intelligence Division, Captain Reed from Special Operations, and several other high-ranking officers who had built their entire careers around this conflict. They nodded respectfully to Sarah as she took her place at the head of the table. But she could see something in their eyes: expectation. They expected her to lead them to another victory, another conquest, another step closer to total domination of this sector of space. The peace treaty proposal from the Terran Federation, Sarah began, placing a slim data pad on the table. "I've reviewed their terms." General Thorne leaned forward immediately. "With respect, Commander, we shouldn't be discussing peace when we're winning. The Terrans are retreating on 3 fronts. Their supply lines are stretched thin. This is exactly the wrong time to show weakness." Admiral Kor nodded in agreement. "My intelligence report suggests they're trying to buy time to rebuild their forces. Give them 6 months of peace, and they'll come back stronger than ever." Sarah listened to their arguments, but her mind kept drifting to other things. She remembered the evacuation of Kepler Prime, when they had to choose between saving the civilian population or protecting the military base. They had saved the civilians, but the base had been lost along with 200 good soldiers. She remembered the young pilot who had volunteered for a suicide mission to take out an enemy command ship. He had been barely 20 years old, with a picture of his family tucked inside his helmet. "Commander," General Thorne's voice brought her back to the present. "What are your thoughts on the resource allocation for the new weapons systems?" Sarah blinked, realizing she had missed part of the conversation. This was unlike her. The Iron Commander never lost focus during strategic discussions. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?" The room fell silent. Admiral Kor and General Thorne exchanged glances. In 15 years of service, they had never seen Sarah lose track of a military briefing. "The new weapons systems," Admiral Kor repeated slowly. "We need approval for increased funding." The latest prototypes could give us a decisive advantage in the next phase of the war. More weapons. More ways to destroy enemy ships. More ways to kill people who were probably just following orders, just like her own soldiers. Zara felt a strange heaviness in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. When had she stopped thinking about the enemy as people and started thinking of them as targets? How many people have died in this war? She asked suddenly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. General Thorne shifted uncomfortably. Commander, casualty figures are classified. But if you need specific numbers, how many on both sides? Zara pressed. Military and civilian. Total losses. Captain Reed cleared his throat. Estimates suggest approximately 12 million across all fronts, including both coalition and Terran forces. 12 million. 12 million people who had been someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. 12 million people who had dreams and hopes and fears just like everyone else. The number hit Zara like a physical blow. Even though she had always known the war was costly, Commander, Admiral Kors said carefully, war is always tragic, but we can't let emotion cloud our strategic judgment. The coalition is depending on us to make the hard decisions. The hard decisions. That phrase had become Zara's constant companion over the years. Every choice she made was a hard decision. Every battle plan required sacrificing something or someone. Every victory came at a price that someone else paid. I need time to consider the treaty proposal. Zara said finally, we'll reconvene tomorrow morning. General Thorne looked surprised. Commander, time is a luxury we don't have. The Terrans are expecting our response within 48 hours. Then we'll give them our answer tomorrow. Zara replied firmly. This meeting is adjourned. As the others filed out, discussing the unusual nature of the meeting in hushed tones, Zara remained seated. She stared at the data pad containing the peace treaty. But the words seemed to blur together. When had she become so tired? When had the weight of command become so heavy that she could barely lift her head? Later, in her private quarters, Zara sat at her desk and pulled out a small box she kept hidden in the bottom drawer. Inside were photographs from her academy days. Images of a young woman with bright eyes and an eager smile. There was one of her graduation day, standing proudly with her class, full of hope about making the galaxy a better place. Another showed her first assignment, working on a peaceful exploration mission to catalog new star systems. That young woman had wanted to discover new worlds, to help establish colonies where families could live in safety. She had dreamed of a future where conflicts were resolved through diplomacy rather than force. She had believed that her service would help create a more peaceful universe. What would that idealistic young officer think of the person Zara had become? Would she be proud of the victories or horrified by the cost? Would she understand the compromises that leadership required? Or would she see them as betrayals of everything they had once believed in? Zara picked up one photograph, herself at age 22, standing beside a group of colonists on a newly settled world. Everyone in the picture was smiling, including her. She couldn't remember the last time she had smiled like that. Real joy seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. The weight of 15 years of command pressed down on her shoulders. Tomorrow, she would have to face the council again and make a decision that would affect millions of lives. She would have to choose between the path of continued war and the uncertain road toward peace. But tonight, alone in her quarters, she allowed herself to grieve for the woman she used to be and wonder if it was too late to find her again. Zara had barely slept when the emergency alarm pierced through the quiet of her quarters. The harsh red lights bathed everything in an urgent glow as she quickly dressed and made her way to the command center. It was 0430 hours, and the ship buzzed with the controlled chaos that came with unexpected developments. Lieutenant Kess met her at the entrance, tablet in hand and worry written across her face. Commander, we have a situation. Intelligence picked up massive fleet movements in the neutral zone. The main display screen dominated the command center, showing a tactical map of the surrounding star systems. Bright red dots marked the positions of Terran Federation ships, far more than should have been there. According to the peace treaty discussions, The formation was spread across 3 sectors, positioned in a way that could either be defensive or preparing for an assault. How many ships? Zara asked, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Our scanners are detecting at least 200 vessels, Commander. Possibly more hiding behind the asteroid fields in Sector 7. 200 ships. That was enough firepower to level entire planets, or defend against a massive attack. The question was, which was their intention? Within minutes, the emergency council was assembled. The same faces from yesterday's meeting now looked even more grim in the harsh lighting of the crisis room. General Thorne paced back and forth, his military bearing more pronounced than usual. Admiral Core stood rigid, her hands clasped behind her back, studying the tactical display with intense focus. This is exactly what I warned you about, General Thorne said, his voice carrying the weight of years of combat experience. The Terrans were never serious about peace. They were buying time to position their forces for a massive strike. Admiral Core nodded grimly. The formation suggests they're preparing for a coordinated assault on our supply lines. If they cut off our resource networks, we could lose the war in a matter of weeks. Other voices joined the discussion, each one adding to the growing sense of urgency. The intelligence reports painted a picture of imminent danger, of an enemy that had supposedly been negotiating in good faith while secretly preparing for war. The evidence seemed clear, but something nagged at Zara's mind. What if they're just as scared as we are? She said quietly, more to herself than to the room. The conversation stopped. General Thorne turned to face her, confusion evident on his weathered features. Commander? Zara looked at the tactical display again, but this time she tried to see it from a different perspective. What if this isn't preparation for an attack? What if it's their way of protecting themselves during the peace negotiations? With respect, Commander, Admiral Core interrupted, we can't afford to assume good intentions. The safety of the coalition depends on our ability to respond to threats, not hope for the best. The room fell silent as everyone waited for Zara's decision. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her like a physical force. These were people who had followed her through impossible battles, who had trusted her judgment when everything seemed lost. They expected her to make the hard choice, to protect the coalition no matter what the cost. But as she stared at the red dots on the screen, Zara found herself thinking about the faces behind those ships. Thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands, who were probably just as afraid as her own soldiers. They had families waiting for them to come home, dreams of a life beyond war, hopes for a future that didn't involve violence. Commander, General Thorne said urgently, we need to make a decision. Every minute we delay gives them more time to complete their preparations. A preemptive strike would catch them off guard. Admiral Core added, we could disable their command structure before they have a chance to launch their attack. Zara closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the voices around her in her mind. She could see the aftermath of such a decision. The bright flashes of weapons fire, the silent explosions in the vacuum of space, the debris that had once been ships full of living people. She could see the reports that would cross her desk afterward, listing casualties with cold efficiency, reducing human lives to numbers in a tactical assessment. How many people would die? She asked, opening her eyes to look at her staff. Captain Reed consulted his tablet. Estimated enemy casualties would be between 15 and 20,000, assuming successful destruction of their primary fleet elements. 20,000 people, 20,000 individuals who would never go home, never see their families again, never have the chance to experience peace. The number hit Zara like a physical blow, and she realized that somewhere along the way, she had lost the ability to make these calculations without feeling the weight of each lost life. And if they attack us first, she asked, our defensive positions are strong, but casualties could reach 30,000 on our side alone, Admiral Core replied, plus whatever civilian populations they might target. The mathematics of war had always been brutal, but now they felt impossibly heavy. Every choice led to death. Every decision meant that someone's son or daughter wouldn't be coming home. Zara had made these calculations countless times before, But tonight they felt different. Tonight, she couldn't separate the strategic necessity from the human cost. "I need more time," she said finally. The room erupted in concerned voices. General Thorne stepped forward, his expression urgent. "Commander, we have maybe 6 hours before they're in position to launch whatever they're planning. We need to act now." 6 hours, Admiral Core agreed. "After that, it may be too late to stop them." Zara looked around the room at these people, who had served with her for years, who had never questioned her judgment, who had followed her into battles that seemed impossible to win. They were good people, dedicated soldiers who genuinely believed they were protecting their civilization. But she could see in their eyes the same thing she had seen in her own reflection lately. A weariness that came from too many years of war, too many hard choices, too many nights wondering if there might have been another way. "Dismissed," she said quietly. "I'll have an answer for you within 4 hours." As the council members filed out, their expressions mixing concern with confusion, Zara remained alone in the command center. The tactical display continued to show the red dots marking enemy positions. But now they seemed less like threats and more like a test of who she had become, and who she still had the courage to be, for the first time in 15 years of command. Zara truly didn't know what to do. The weight of the decision felt crushing, and she realized that everyone expected her to be perfect, to always know the right answer, to never doubt or hesitate. But standing there in the dim light of the command center, surrounded by the tools of war, she felt more human than she had in years. And that humanity, she was beginning to understand, might be the most important thing she had left. The observation lounge was empty at 3 in the morning, just as Zara had hoped it would be. She sat in the same chair she had occupied 2 nights ago, watching the same stars that had witnessed countless human conflicts throughout history. The emergency had passed its critical point hours ago, but she still had no answer. The weight of the decision pressed against her chest like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. She had dismissed the council at midnight, promising them an answer by dawn. Now dawn was only 3 hours away, and she felt further from a solution than ever. The tactical reports lay scattered on the small table beside her, each one offering a different perspective on the Terran fleet movements. Some suggested aggressive intent, others pointed to defensive positioning. The truth, as always in war, was buried somewhere in between. The soft hiss of the door opening barely registered in her consciousness. She expected it to be one of the night shift officers with another update, another piece of information that would make her decision even more complicated. Instead, she heard the familiar footsteps of Lieutenant Kess, approaching quietly. "Commander, I brought you some tea," Kess said softly, setting a steaming cup on the table. "I thought you might need it." Zara looked up, surprised. "It's 0300 hours, Lieutenant. What are you doing awake?" "Same thing you are, I imagine. Thinking about tomorrow." Kess settled into the chair across from her, holding her own cup of tea. "Mind if I sit for a moment?" For a brief second, Zara considered dismissing her aide. Military protocol demanded clear lines between officers and their subordinates. But something in Kess's voice, a gentleness that had nothing to do with rank or duty, made her nod instead. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, sipping their tea and watching the stars. The warmth of the liquid felt good against Zara's throat, and she realized she hadn't eaten or drunk anything in hours. The simple act of caring for herself had become foreign, lost somewhere in the endless cycle of command decisions and strategic planning. "You're afraid," Kess said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air between them in 15 years of command. No one had ever said that to Zara. No one had ever dared to suggest that the Iron Commander might feel fear. The statement should have been insubordination, a breach of military etiquette that demanded immediate correction. Instead, Zara found herself nodding slowly. Terrified, she admitted, the word feeling strange on her tongue. "Everyone expects me to have all the answers, to never doubt, never waver. But beneath this uniform, I'm just a woman who's tired of war and afraid of making the wrong choice." The confession felt like stepping off a cliff. For so long, She had been the symbol of strength that everyone needed, the unwavering leader who never showed weakness. But here, in the quiet darkness of the observation lounge, with only the stars as witnesses, she finally allowed herself to be human. "Tell me about before," Kes said gently. "Before the war, before the command. Who were you then?" Zara set down her teacup and leaned back in her chair. "I was someone who believed in exploration, in discovery. I wanted to map new star systems, to help establish colonies where families could live in peace. I thought my service would help create a better galaxy, not just a more efficient way to destroy it." She talked about her academy days, about the friends she had made and lost along the way. She spoke of the young officer who had once dreamed of scientific missions and diplomatic solutions, who had believed that most conflicts could be resolved through understanding rather than force. That person felt like someone she had known long ago, almost like a character from a story someone had told her. "I used to keep a journal," Zara continued, her voice growing softer. "Every night, I would write down something beautiful I had seen that day, a nebula, a unique star formation, the way light reflected off a planet's rings. I thought I was recording history, documenting the wonders of the universe." "What happened to it?" Kes asked. "I stopped writing in it about 10 years ago. I couldn't find anything beautiful anymore, only strategic advantages and tactical positions. The universe had become a battlefield, and I had forgotten how to see it as anything else." Kes was quiet for a long moment, processing what she had heard. "You know, Commander, I've served under other leaders. Some were brave, some were smart, some were skilled tacticians. But you're the only one who ever made me feel like what we were doing mattered beyond just winning." "What do you mean?" "The way you remember the names of soldiers who died in battle. The way you always ask about evacuation procedures for civilian populations before you approve any operation. The way you make sure field hospitals are protected even when it's tactically inconvenient. You never lost that person who wanted to protect people, Commander. You just buried her under duty and responsibility." Zara felt tears forming in her eyes for the first time in years. "But what if I make the wrong choice tomorrow? What if I'm not strong enough to carry this burden anymore?" "Maybe," Kes said quietly, "the strongest thing you can do is admit that you're not superhuman. Maybe your people need to see that their leader is someone who struggles with these decisions, who feels the weight of every life lost, who cares enough to be afraid." They sat together until dawn began to touch the edges of the viewport, painting the darkness with hints of distant light. As the ship's day cycle began and the corridors filled with the sounds of the morning shift, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not certainty about what to do, but peace with the process of deciding. "Thank you," she said as Kes prepared to leave, "for seeing me as more than just a symbol. You were never just a symbol to me, Commander. You were always a person worth following." As Kes left and Zara prepared to face the council, she realized that something fundamental had shifted. She still didn't know what decision she would make about the Terran fleet, but she knew who would be making it. Not the Iron Commander, untouchable and perfect, but Zara Vex, a woman who had learned that strength and vulnerability were not opposites, but partners in the complex dance of leadership. The stars outside continued their eternal rotation, and, for the first time in years, Zara found them beautiful again. The council chamber felt different when Zara entered at 0800 hours. The same faces surrounded the same table, but something had changed in the air. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, or maybe it was the subtle shift in her expression. But several of the senior officers exchanged glances. As she took her position at the head of the table, General Thorne leaned forward immediately. "Commander, have you reached a decision about the Terran fleet?" Admiral Kor's hands were folded tightly on the table, her jaw set with the tension of someone who had spent sleepless hours preparing for battle. "Our forces are ready to execute whatever plan you approve." Zara looked around the room at these people who had served with her through so many conflicts. They had trusted her judgment when victory seemed impossible, followed her orders when the odds were stacked against them, and never questioned her ability to lead them through the darkest moments of the war. Now they sat waiting for her to make another impossible choice, expecting her to be the same unshakable leader she had always been. But she wasn't the same person who had walked into this room yesterday. I've spent 15 years being what you needed me to be, she began, her voice steady, but carrying a different quality than before. I've been your sword, your shield, your symbol of strength. I've made the hard decisions, carried the weight of command, and never let you see me doubt or waver. The room was completely silent. This wasn't how military briefings usually began, and several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But today, I stand before you not as the Iron Commander, but as someone who has learned that true strength isn't about never showing weakness. It's about facing your fears and choosing what's right despite them. General Thorne's weathered face showed confusion. Commander, with respect, we need to know how to proceed with the Terran situation. Yes, we do. Zare agreed. But first, I need to tell you something. Last night, I was terrified. Not of the enemy, not of battle, but of making the wrong choice. Of being responsible for more death when there might be another way. Admiral Kor looked genuinely shocked. Commander, fear is natural in combat situations, but we can't let it influence our strategic decisions. You're right, Zare said. Fear shouldn't control our decisions, but it should inform them. My fear isn't about personal danger. It's about the cost of war. It's about the faces of the young soldiers who won't come home, the families who will never see their loved ones again, the futures that will never happen because of choices I make in this room. She walked to the tactical display showing the Terran fleet positions. I've been thinking about these ships not as red dots on a screen, but as vessels carrying thousands of people. People who might be just as afraid as we are, just as tired of fighting, just as desperate to find a way home. Captain Reach spoke up hesitantly. Commander, are you suggesting we ignore the threat they represent? I'm suggesting we consider the possibility that they don't represent a threat at all. What if their positioning is defensive? What if they're trying to protect themselves during peace negotiations? The same way we've been reinforcing our own borders. The room buzzed with quiet conversations. Some officers nodded thoughtfully, while others looked skeptical. General Thorne stood up, his expression serious. Commander, that's a dangerous assumption. If you're wrong, we could lose everything. And if I'm right, Zare replied, we could save everything, not just our forces, but theirs too. We could finally break the cycle of violence that has consumed this sector for decades. She turned back to face the room. I'm not asking you to follow me because I'm infallible. I'm asking you to follow me because I'm human enough to feel the weight of every decision, to question my own judgment, to care about the lives of people on both sides of this conflict. Admiral Kor stood slowly. What are you proposing, Commander? I'm proposing that we try something that hasn't been attempted in this war. Direct communication, not through diplomatic channels or formal negotiations, but direct ship-to-ship contact. I want to speak with their fleet commander, person to person, and find out what they're really planning. The room erupted in concerned voices. Several officers spoke at once, pointing out the risks, the potential for trap, the breach of military protocol. But Zare held up her hand for silence. I know it's unprecedented. I know it's dangerous. But continuing to assume the worst about each other is what got us into this war in the first place. Maybe it's time to try assuming the best. General Thorne shook his head. Commander, this goes against everything we've learned about tactical engagement. You're putting the entire fleet at risk based on hope. No, Zare said firmly, I'm putting the fleet at risk based on leadership. Real leadership means making decisions that serve the greater good, even when they're difficult or unpopular. It means having the courage to choose compassion over conquest when the opportunity presents itself. She looked around the room again, seeing the mixture of doubt and admiration in her officers' faces. I've led you through 3 major conflicts. I've never asked you to do anything I wouldn't do myself. Today, I'm asking you to trust me one more time. Not because I'm perfect, but because I'm willing to risk everything for peace. Over the next hour, they worked out the details of the communication attempt. It would be risky. requiring the Coalition flagship to move within transmission range of the Terran fleet. If the enemy intended to attack, this would give them a perfect opportunity. But something had changed in the room's atmosphere. The officers who had initially objected began offering suggestions for making the plan work. Even General Thorne, despite his reservations, started contributing tactical advice for protecting the ship during the communication attempt. 3 hours later, Zara found herself on the bridge, watching the main screen as they approached the Terran fleet. The enemy ships held their positions, weapons powered but not locked on target. It was a tense moment that could go either way. "Open a channel," Zara ordered. The screen flickered, and suddenly she was looking at a middle-aged woman in a blue uniform, sitting in what was clearly the command chair of a Terran warship. The woman's expression was cautious but not hostile. "I'm Commander Zara Vex of the Coalition flagship Hegemony," she said simply. "I'm hoping we can talk." The Terran commander studied her for a long moment. "I'm Fleet Admiral Chen of the Terran Federation. I have to admit, this is not what I expected today." "What did you expect, honestly?" "An attack. Our intelligence suggested you might interpret our defensive positioning as aggressive action." Zara felt a wave of relief wash over her. "So you're not preparing to attack us?" "No more than you're preparing to attack us," Admiral Chen replied, with a slight smile. "We're both scared, aren't we? Scared of making the wrong move. Scared of being responsible for restarting a war that's already cost too many lives." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, to military leaders speaking honestly about their fears, their hopes, and their shared desire to find a way forward that didn't involve more violence. By the end, they had agreed to joint patrols of the neutral zone and direct communication protocols to prevent future misunderstandings. As the screen went dark and the Terran fleet began moving to their agreed-upon positions, Zara turned to face her bridge crew. She saw something in their eyes that had been missing for years: hope. "Set course for home," she ordered. "It's time to start building peace instead of just fighting wars." Later, in her personal log, Zara wrote, "Today I learned that the greatest armor isn't the one that hides your humanity, but the courage to let others see it beneath this uniform. I'm just a woman, and that's exactly who my people needed me to be." The stars outside continued their eternal dance, but now they seemed brighter somehow, full of possibilities that had been hidden by the smoke of war. For the first time in 15 years, Zara Vex was looking forward to tomorrow.